Strochine. I think he knows half the room already anyway. And he's the author and co-author of his Fort Meade book with Bobby Sago, the late archivist at Black Hills State University. So we welcome you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dodie. Yeah, Lee Strochine, no relation to Dale Strochine that had the drugstore here in town for many years. No relation whatsoever. No relation to the Strochines from up by Newell and in that area. So don't ask me about that. Yeah, I grew up here in Sturgis, graduated from high school here, went to USD and got a degree in history. Then I went to a small private school in Minnesota and got a degree in education. Taught for 20 years. And then about 8 years ago, I moved back here to the Black Hills. I got a job as an EMT, which I currently do. I'm an EMT here in Sturgis, an EMT in Spearfish. My fun summer job is I am part of Deadwood Alive. We're the group in Deadwood that does the gunfights and the trial of Jack McCall. And I'm also the secretary for the board of directors for the Old Fort Meade Museum and Historical Association. And it was my connection with Fort Meade that got me to think about doing the project for this book. And this is a copy of the cover of the book. I do have copies for sale after the presentation if anyone is interested in one. I will gladly sell you one. And as Dodie mentioned, I did the book with Bobby Sago. Sadly, Bobby passed away about a month before the book was released. We did get our preview copies beforehand, so she did get to see the finished product. This was the 5th book that Bobby had done, and if it wasn't for Bobby, the book probably wouldn't exist. 2 years ago at the West River History Conference, I didn't know Bobby at the time, but she was there with a table displaying the other books that she had done. And I went up to her and I said, "So, how do you get one of those done?" Because I was interested in doing one with the museum's collection. She said, "Well, it's pretty easy. I can help you out." I said, "Okay, I'll get back in touch with you." About a month later, I get an email from Bobby going, "So, when are we going to start that book on Fort Meade?" And if you know Bobby, that's the way she was. So we started the work in January of 2017, and the book came out in April of this year. So roughly a 1.5 year long project to do it. So we started out going through the photographs, the thousands of photographs at the museum. We were limited. Arcadia Publishing only allows 200 photographs in the book. So we went through the photographs, picked out the ones we wanted to use, scanned them in, went through them a second time to figure out which ones we actually wanted to use. And we had some photographs that were rather large. Now these long 3-foot panoramic photographs, trying to scan one of those on a 9 by 12 foot scanner isn't the easiest thing to do. We didn't use too many of the big ones just because of that. But lots of photographs there. And I'm going to start out kind of a historic changes of Fort Meade itself over the years. The first one here is Camp Rulin from 1878, and there was Camp Sturgis, which was set up first, named after Jack Sturgis. Colonel Sturgis, the commander of the 7th Cavalry, Jack Sturgis passed away, or was killed, I shouldn't say passed away, was killed at Little Bighorn with Custer. Camp Rulin was the first established camp where they were going to build the fort. 1878, this is the earliest photograph of Fort Meade. Then the next photograph is 1888 of Fort Meade, and this is the earliest one we could find of what was called Fort Meade. It shows the parade ground, headquarters building right there. And kind of in the same layout things are. On either side of the headquarters building are barracks, single-story barracks, and opposite the parade ground, on the side facing us, is the officers' quarters, just like Fort Meade is laid out today. This one is Fort Meade, 1905 to 1908. That was the time period that the Army decided to make changes and go away from wooden structures to stone and brick structures. And all the frontier posts at that time, they started making the changes. These are the buildings, for the most part, that are the ones that exist out there now, the barracks and everything. There was a later change during the 30s when they put in temporary buildings. So if you ever go out to Fort Meade, and they're all numbered, and if you see a building that's got a T in front of the number, that was one of those temporary buildings that was put in the 30s. And here's another photo. This is 1912 to 1913, and it is you can see right there, that's the headquarters building, which is now the museum. It's easy to spot because of the white cupola on the top of the building. And the barracks on either side, for the most part of they still exist. There's a couple of them that are missing. The officers' quarters. Okay, in the 1930s, Fort Meade was kind of the headquarters for the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, here in the Black Hills. And this is Camp Fechner, which was the CCC camp out at Fort Meade. It's kind of on you can oversee the area if you take the road that goes up to the old cemetery. There are some remains that are there. And during World War II, Camp Fechner was repurposed as a POW camp for the German POW prisoners of war that were here. And here you can see Camp Fechner in the foreground with Fort Meade in the background. So Fort Meade again from the 1930s. Really hasn't changed a whole lot at this time. Now the big change. Oh, not yet. Jumped ahead. This is the 1940s with the headquarters building, the museum. What always interests me with these photos are all the trees. You go out to Fort Meade now and there's none of these trees. That's the drive. You can see the couple of the museum, the headquarters building there, and the hedges and everything. None of that exists. And because of the change to the VA, there's not a lot of pictures after the 40s to see when that all disappeared. I don't know, Randy, do you know when that all?
Randy, we weren't there when we moved here.
Now the change, the VA hospital, the building of the VA hospital in the 1940s. Right here is the construction of it, an aerial photograph showing as they're making the changes, tearing down some of the stables. There were originally 9 stables at Fort Meade for all the horses. There are 3 that still exist to this day. And it just gives a nice overview of what it looked like. And if you're familiar with the layout of Fort Meade now, with the VA hospital out there and everything, you know where it's at. Now on to some of the people that were associated or were stationed at Fort Meade. Now some of these photographs, we got the information on the back. Some of them, we just had names of who the people were in the photographs. So when we submitted the captions to Arcadia Press, some of the captions just had Lieutenant Ward, no first name. And they're like, well, we really like to have first names if you have it. So I started doing research to find out who these men were, these officers. And as I was doing this, there was a lot of information I learned about some of these men. And that's what I'm going to share with you about some of these photos, is who these men are that served out at Fort Meade, spent their time there. First one here, this is Colonel Henry M. Lazelle. Name Lazelle might sound familiar to everybody in here, or most everybody in here. I got some friends from Wisconsin that are here, so they're not too familiar with the area. He was the first commander of Fort Meade, and he was with the 1st Infantry. They were the ones that did the building of Fort Meade. Now the image came from James Carson, which is his great-grandson. James Carson wrote a book on Colonel Lazelle, and last summer he came out to the museum and did a presentation, a book signing on his book, and he he had this photo on the front cover of his book, and we're like, is it possible for us to get a copy of that for our book? And he's like, sure. So he tried emailing me a copy. It didn't work. Tried a couple of different times. He's like, you know what? I'll just send you the original photograph. So he mailed me the photograph. I got it. I scanned it. The next day, I sent it back to him. So we have, thanks to him, we have this photograph of James Carson, from James Carson of Colonel Lazelle, the very first one. Like I said, some of the information that we got on the men in the photographs were on slips of paper, either written on the back. This is actually a wet plate glass photograph that's in the museum's collection. I found it hidden in one of the boxes down in the basement, because I was going through every possible box I could find to find neat photographs. And I found this one. This is James Plunkett with his son William. And you can see the different years that he served. He was in the 1st Infantry, served at Fort Meade, ended up leaving the service at Fort Meade, and lived in the area, and he died in 1891, and he is buried in the old cemetery. Here we have a picture of his wife, Elizabeth Torrance Baldwin Plunkett. She had 3 husbands. All 3 of them were in the 1st Infantry. Why she chose 1st Infantry, it might have been they were the ones that she was around. She might have been a washerwoman. We don't know anything about her besides 3 husbands, and she died in 1907.
She looks kind of sad, too.
Yeah, well, losing 3 husbands?
Is the Baldwin name significant?
Not that I'm aware of.
She is related to Chris Plunkett, or
Okay.
Chris Kitefors.
Now, this picture probably has what I would consider the most famous officer that was at Fort Meade, the one that without him certain things wouldn't have happened. Seated in the middle of the back row, the gentleman with the mustache. Well, I guess they all got mustaches. This gentleman right here. That's Colonel Caleb Carleton. He was the commander of the 8th Cavalry, and this photograph was from 1892. Colonel Carleton served from 1859 to 1897. He served at 13 different frontier posts, including Fort Meade. Why I consider him the most famous was he was the one that instituted the playing of the Star-Spangled Banner. And if you know the story of the Star-Spangled Banner in Fort Meade, it was because of his wife making the suggestion that they play something at the end of the day for the soldiers. She suggested the Star-Spangled Banner, and that led to it becoming our national anthem. Now, some of the other gentlemen in this photograph, Major Almond Wells. He's on Carleton's right, so it would be the person to our left as we're looking at the picture. He was involved in one of the longest cavalry marches in 1888, went from Fort Davis, Texas to Fort Meade, 1,800 miles. This is the 1926 4th Cavalry Polo Team. And with horses and horsemanship, of course, you're going to get equestrian events. Polo was a big one. These gentlemen, we know their names because it was written on the back who they are. From left to right, we have Lieutenant John Gregg III. Then we have Captain Fisk. Never found Captain Fisk's first name. No idea. The next one is Captain John Wall, and he became well known for writing a number of books about horses. Surprise, surprise. A cavalry officer writing something about horses. The next one to him, the 4th one, that's Lieutenant John Ward. And after leaving Fort Meade, he ended up being stationed in the Philippines. And he was there during World War II. During the Bataan Death March, when all the American troops that were there surrendered and were forced marched by the Japanese, on April 11th, 1942, he was bayoneted by a Japanese guard because he wasn't able to keep up. The Japanese at that time, if somebody fell, they either stabbed him or shot him right there on the side of the road, made everybody else march. That's what happened to Lieutenant Ward. And the one on the end on the right, that's Lieutenant David Stone. He served from 1923 to 1926. He was recalled during World War II and Korea. He attended West Point, and when he graduated, he wanted to go to flying school. Well, he attended flying school, but was found deficient. And that's the term that I found that was used for him, was he was found deficient in flying school. So he was transferred to the cavalry. He disliked that. He wanted to fly, so he resigned. When he was recalled, they put him in the Air Force, and he retired as a colonel in the Air Force. So he got his wish eventually. Okay? Okay. This is from 1936, and this is an Army Relief fundraising party, and the theme was the Stratobowl launch. The Stratobowl that they launched from the exploration to achieve they set the highest man altitude record at that time. And they were having a celebration. By looking at the picture, this is probably the ballroom in the upstairs of the museum. There are some things about it that are different, and looked at this picture and I'm like, okay, there's changes that have been made to that room because it doesn't quite look this way, but that's the only place it probably would have been at that time. A number of the men are identified on the back of this photograph. The ladies aren't, just the men. So we don't know who the ladies were, but some of the interesting ones here. In the back, on the second from the left, that's Lieutenant Charles Bixel. And in 1934, he was the one that was detailed to establish the camp that was put there to support the Stratobowl launch. The 4th Cavalry provided security and support for the Stratobowl launch. So he was the one that detailed with that. He retired as a brigadier general. The 4th from the left in the rear, that's Captain William Biddle III. He was awarded 39 military decorations, including 2 Distinguished Service Medals, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Legion of Merit. And he retired as a major general. As I was going through this, trying to find out about these men, I was surprised at the number of them that ended up ending their career as a general of one form or another, different ranks of general. 5th from the right, this is First Lieutenant Eric Swede Svensson Jr. He retired as a brigadier general, and then after he retired, he taught at Huron College, here in South Dakota. The 2nd from the right in the rear, this is 2nd Lieutenant John Rhodes, and this is an interesting story with him. In 1937, while at Fort Meade, he met Lucy Nelson of Bozeman, Montana. She was the niece of his regimental commander, Colonel Stanley Cook. Lieutenant Rhodes was designated to escort the colonel's niece to a ball, and they were married in 1938. Now, a couple of years ago, we got a package in the mail out at the museum with a book. And the best way to describe this book was it was a yearbook of the 4th Cavalry. It had pictures of all of them in there. And Lieutenant Rhodes was one of them that had put the book together. The package had come from his son. He had sent it to the museum with the letter telling the story of how his parents had met at Fort Meade. And he knew the connection, and he said, without Fort Meade, I wouldn't exist. Because that's where they met. So that's how we know the story of Lieutenant Rhodes and his wife. The first from the right is Second Lieutenant Edward Sayer. He's another one that retired as a Major General. Okay, this one is from 1938, and this is the Fort Meade Dramatic Club's production of Shh, Not So Loud.
What was that?
This one is one we found two copies, each one slightly different, and we didn't choose this one to put in the book. There's a different one that we put in the book because we liked the other one better. But these ones, the ladies were identified as well as the men. But trying to find out, Mrs. Smith or something like that with no first name, any history, it didn't happen. But some of the gentlemen, okay? Fourth from the left is Captain William Veckery. He started out as an enlisted man in the engineers during World War I. He resigned as a sergeant and then became an officer in 1919. And we'll see him again in just a minute. Third from the right is Lieutenant Edward Chemo Dunn. He retired as a Major General. He led a cavalry task force on D-Day during World War II. He grew up in Plankington and died in White Lake, South Dakota. This is one of those panoramic, one of those big 3-foot images that I scanned part of it and then scanned the other part of it. And when I was preparing for the presentation, I had to adjust to put the two pictures together. In the book, they made it a 2-page fold, so the crease is right in the middle so you can't see it. But the interesting thing, and I didn't realize this until I was putting the presentation together, the commander, this is the 1941, this is the Quartermaster Corps of the 4th Cavalry, and the commander is Major William Veckery. We just saw him in the previous picture in the production as captain. So between 1938 and 1941, he got promoted. So he was one that was out there and saw a promotion, and I didn't realize that until I put the presentation together that, wait a minute, same guy, 2 different ranks, 2 different years. Okay, now some changes to the soldiers in general over the years. This is Company C of the 3rd Infantry in 1890. The uniforms they're wearing are a modification or changes, but they're still very similar to what was worn during the Civil War. Blue coat, blue pants, and a kepi. The rifles they're armed with are trapdoor Springfields, 45-70, which the government introduced right after the Civil War, and they were in use until 1894 when they came out with the 30-40 Craig. And they're doing target practice, staging for a photograph. Okay. 1909, this is the 4th Cavalry. Kind of hard to see in this picture, but it's a nice panoramic showing the whole fort. The commanding officer and staff are the ones that are, this is them right there. And the band are the ones that are on the left on the white horses with their instruments. If any of you were ever in band, imagine whatever instrument you played, doing it on horseback. And the companies that were here that are in this picture are A, B, C, D, I, K, L, and M. So it would have been a full regiment that was out here in 1909. 1913. Notice the change in uniforms. What we think of as World War I era uniforms with the Smoky Bear hat, as I call them. The uniforms have gone from the blue to the olive drab. And this is the 19th Infantry, 1913, at a show. It says there in the bottom of the photograph, Barry Stadium they used for a lot of shows during the years. Horse shows, drill competitions, and the like. Anybody recognize this gentleman? Okay, well, I'll tell you who he is in just a minute. This is a bugler from the 4th Cavalry in 1930. On the left is his summer uniform getting ready to go on duty, and on the right is a dress blue uniform that was not government issued, just to show a difference in the uniforms that they had. Now, when I say this gentleman's name, some of you are going to go, I've heard that name before. His name is Everett Rambo. If you happen to know Charles Rambo, this is his father. Yes. We have another photograph that's in the book of Everett with a colt that he trained to shake hands. The interesting things that you learn about people when you look at photographs. Okay. 1943, this is the 88th Glider Airborne Troops. They were the last active duty troops stationed at Fort Meade during World War II, and the change in uniforms. We saw what the 1930s looked like, the 19-teens. This is World War II, and the glider troops came here to practice because in preparation to land in Europe with the terrain here. They had troops here, and they also had glider troops down at Fort Robinson. And they actually at Fort Robinson practiced landing. They didn't do any landing with the gliders here.
There's people there in civilian clothes.
They would have been dignitaries that were there to observe what was going on. It could have been local dignitaries, or it could have been somebody. Yeah. Okay. As I said, they did different events out at Berry Stadium. Trusting fellow here to let.
He looks blindfolded.
I was gonna say, yeah.
But still, to let somebody do that to you. This was done in Belle Fourche. The 4th Cavalry were involved a lot in things in Belle Fourche as well as here, and in Deadwood, different presentations, different shows that they would do. And it was always, the pictures, it always seemed like they had a good time when they were doing it. Okay. This is the Troop E, the Black Horse Troop of the 4th Cavalry in 1938 at Berry Stadium. And the commanding officer was Captain William Biddle. We saw him in one of the earlier pictures. Now, Berry Stadium was named after the Colonel Berry, who was the commander at Fort Meade in 1937 and died suddenly of pneumonia. So they ended up naming the stadium after him, and they named a trophy after him, the Berry Trophy. Well, I got a hold of the U.S. Cavalry Association to ask them for any information on the Berry Trophy, and they said, no, we've heard of it, but we don't have any information. Will you share anything you have with us? Well, sadly, we don't have much on it. Okay, this is the service club. The rec hall, as some people know of it. This is what it looked like in the 1940s. The mural painted on the wall there was done by some of the servicemen that were stationed out at Fort Meade. Now, we mentioned the inflation, or the Stratobowl launch. This is from 1936, or 1935, excuse me. This is the second attempt. The first attempt was in 1934. The balloon launched and got a hole in it. And so they were able to parachute out of the gondola and survive. Nobody was injured. So they tried again the next year. And the reason they used the Stratobowl was because of the location. They could inflate the balloon and get it nice and big before it got up into the winds and everything. And as I said, the 4th Cavalry provided security and support. They were the ones that filled all the tanks. They're the ones holding all the ropes around the balloon as it's inflating. And this is a series of photographs. We weren't able to put them all in the book. I would have liked to have, but like I said, we were limited to 200 photographs, so I could only put in a few. And it took them all night to inflate this. They wanted an early morning launch, so they took all night to inflate. And there is the launch of it. Now, these next three photographs are different times in downtown Sturgis. This first one is the 8th Cavalry from the late 1880s, early 1890s, just based on the uniform and the dress of when it is. And as we look at these pictures, I'll come back to them all, but there's something unique that I noticed as I put the three photographs together. This one is the 12th Cavalry from 1913, and this photo we didn't have when we did the book. After the book came out, the museum has a Facebook page. This gentleman contacted us from the 12th Cavalry History Association and said, I have photos of the 12th Cavalry. Would you be interested in them? And would you share the photographs that you have with me? I'm like, yes. And he sent us this one. Nice picture of the soldiers downtown. And then this one. Soldiers probably from the 30s, 40s, that time period, downtown Main Street. Okay, now I have to go over to the, I don't have my clicker, so I have to go over here. Okay, everybody recognizes where this is, downtown, those of you that are familiar. It's the corner of 2nd and Main. Okay, just down the street. I back up to this one. Anybody recognize the corner here? It's 2nd and Main. Because you can tell the bank building. Okay, notice the windows in the building here. That building right there, 2nd and Main.
Looks like Calvin Lewis standing there.
Yeah, it does. But I never, until I put the pictures together and took a look at them, I didn't realize that they were all the same intersection here in town. As I said, the photographs, a number of the photographs had captions on the back, so we were able to identify who the people were in them. There were some that, okay, it might have been nice to use, but no name, so we skipped it. This one, it's a general from the 1890s. We would have loved to have used this image in the book. Unfortunately, we have no idea who he is. I don't know how many hours of research I spent trying to identify him. I went through and found pictures of generals from the time period, or a list of generals from the time period, and then went to find pictures to match them up. Some of them I could tell immediately, no, that's not him. There were a couple, it's like, well, it might be. Too bad this photo that I found is from the 1860s when they were in the Civil War, and this is 30 years later. It might be, then again, it might not be. And then there were some generals that I could find no pictures of. So we couldn't identify him. So, if I can leave you with one final note, if you have photographs, identify them. Put who they are on the back. Because you never know at some point in the future when somebody might want to use that for reference as to who that person was or what the connection was. And so, with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming and listening. And again, this is my book. I do have copies if you want. I will entertain questions. I might not be able to answer them because I spend a lot of time looking at photographs and identifying things in photographs. But, so, any questions?
I was under the impression that prisoners of war during World War II were Italian.
There were both here. There were both German and Italian troops that were here. But we do have artifacts out at the museum that were done by German troops, because they are in German. I don't know an Italian that would decorate something and write it in German.
social on Saturday or Sunday?
Sunday, yes. Yep, Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock, we're having a pie and ice cream social, followed by our annual meeting. So if you're interested in belonging, having a membership out at the museum, come to the meeting. Even if you're not, come to the meeting. Come for the pie and ice cream beforehand. And then afterwards, at 3 o'clock, Randy Bender's going to do a presentation up at the old Fort Meade Cemetery. So, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to write myself a little note and I forgot. So, yeah, that's Sunday afternoon. So if you're interested, come out. Any other questions?
Does the museum have a lot of artifacts like letters and that kind of stuff, or is it more military?
It's more military.
Okay.
We do have some items that are paper items, that different things, but the actual military records in and of themselves, we don't have them, because when the military left Fort Meade, they were all shipped to a central location.
We do, one interesting letter we do have on display was written by a young lady who came to Fort Meade in the 1880s. She worked at the Post Traders store. And it's a letter back home. And she tells about her experiences of coming across Dakota Territory and working at Fort Meade. And she included some hand-drawn pictures, which are remarkably accurate, too. But that's on display in one of our rooms. But I think that's the only letter we have.
Yeah, that's...
Oh, we have a letter from the bugler, from Little Bighorn,
Yeah,
Bart Garlick. His
Yeah.
letter is on display.
yeah.
I think that is such a good cover. Look at those young men, so tall and straight.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just something.
Garlic?
Yeah, the cover photo is something that Bobby and I had discussions over, which picture to put on the cover, because I wanted the one of the guys jumping over the other one on the horse. That's the one I wanted. I wanted something that would capture people's attention, but I trusted Bobby's experience, having done 4 of these others. She said no, the publisher would go for something more with the fort in the background and soldiers, and
You
so
capture a lot of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the one we agreed on.
Speaking of horses, the last batch of horses that they sold off, my dad bought one. And that's when we lived in Wasta. He was so, I mean, we were only 4, 5, 6, whatever, but it was so cool. We walked all around under it, and he was like 16 or 17 hands tall. We had him for about 3 years. We'd jump on him bareback, just take off.
One of the times, besides the time that, at the Strata Bowl, where the balloon didn't go up, was there a second one? Only one time?
They had two launches. One in 1934, that was the one that got a leak in the balloon and ended up crashing. And then the one in 1935 that I showed the photos of. That one reached over 70,000 feet. It was the highest manned flight at that time.
But I'm talking about deflating within the Strata Bowl itself. It was
Oh.
at first one, because
No.
I was at one and I
Okay.
went with my parents. I know the one in 1936, it was very successful.
Mhm.
That's the year my sister was born.
Okay,
But he was there in 35 or,
okay.
I just don't know for sure, but
Yeah,
I know
what-
that I was there and everybody was disappointed because
Okay, I don't know anything about that. I know the two that both were launched, and the first one got a hole in it, in the balloon itself.
so maybe that's the one.
Yeah, but it was, they got up to
Yeah.
35 or 36,000 feet.
This one deflated within the Strata
Huh.
Bowl. My memory,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I have a picture of my grandfather. My dad was born at Fort Meade in 35, because he was part of the security group for that, and I have a real good picture of him in front of that thing.
Yeah, yeah. There's, I could have put in a lot more photos for the presentation, but I like to keep it to roughly 35 minutes or so with just the 40 images that I have versus the 200 that are in the book and the other 200 or whatever that we scanned in that we didn't use. And I have some photographs that show some of the troops down at the providing security down at the camp at the Strata Bowl, or as they refer to it, Strata Camp.
Does the book have a few short stories in there too about some of the
It's
events?
just captions.
Just captions?
Just captions underneath.
Do you have Indian Lament,
No,
the horse?
no, no.
A lot of people don't know that story about the champion horse.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know anything about it until after we were done.
Oh.
Randy was telling me about it, so.
That's a good story.
So, well, thank you all for coming and listening to me babble on.